AJ, when just talking about this reminds me of my childhood. When I was a little boy, it was mum and dad and three older brothers, and I was the baby of the family. And I can remember whenever I wanted to experience my emotions, whenever I was playing or got hurt, you know, Dad would shut me down, or Mum would shut me down, or my older brothers would shut me down as well. And then there's the other side of it as well. When I was at times quite joyful and happy, my brothers and Mum and Dad shut me down as well.
Yes.
And that's a pretty hard thing to take.
Yes.
And I couldn't run away from my family, which I wanted to many times.
Yes. That's the trouble being a child, isn't it? You can't.
Yeah, you
many
can't
of us
leave.
want to leave home when we're 4, right? We pack our bags, but we can't know where to go. Go on, though.
So, I've just had, I feel in my heart, and I still have it now, just a huge, I guess it's anger and despair. It goes on and on and on. It's just been sitting there, it feels like it's been sitting there my whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just can't, I don't know, I just want to get it out, you know? I just want to...
All right, well, let's talk about how to get it out, shall we? Let's talk about how it's constructed, and then when we can construct it, we can sort of understand the deconstruction process, and then what you'll need to do to feel it, to feel your way through it. So what happened when you were little? Here's the causal emotion. And what happened, the causal emotion might be you were either in your desire, which is a very, very good thing, or you were just in an emotional process, like where you hurt yourself, scratched yourself, cut yourself, whatever, and you're crying or whatever, just feeling an emotion. So the causal thing is we're often feeling our desires, which is great, and we're also often feeling our emotions, which is also great, right? That's what's happening inside of us as a child. But then what happens is our environment, usually our parents and older siblings, because our older siblings have learnt to do it from our parents, they then judge our causal emotion, which then sets up a fear of our causal emotion. Does that make sense? So straight away now we've got a fear going on about dealing with this particular emotion or having this particular desire. Then what happens is the fear itself, unfortunately, also gets judged by our environment. And then that sets up this anger, right, inside of us. Now, this will happen even when we're a child. So by now, we've now got anger inside of us as a child, like 3, 4, 5-year-old, and we're angry inside. That's why you have the period called the terrible twos, you know, because already there's a lot of emotional shutdown occurring by the environment that the child doesn't understand. It's just reflecting, and it's feeling all of this judgment and all of this fear, and it can't feel them because every time it tries to go into a cry or get scared, everyone judges that as well and projects terrible emotions at the child because of that. And so in the end, the child's getting into anger, and then we're trying to feel our anger. Are we allowed to even feel that? No. Every time I get angry, what happens? I get a belting, or I get punished in some way, or I get sent to my room or whatever. So my anger now gets judged by my environment. So where do I go with that? Right? Can you see that all it is layer upon layer of judgment that finishes up creating each layer of emotions inside of us? Do you see that? This is what's happened inside. So now we're in this state where we're depressed and everything, and of course everyone judges depression as well, don't they? Like particularly if you're a male and you're depressed, like a female generally is normally sort of allowed to be depressed, but if you're a man and you're depressed, like, you know, that's a major problem. And so what happens is we have judgment about that as well. And so what do we do then? We just get into this state where we're now in our mind, right? And usually in that state, that is the state of our highest addictive self, where we're now just focusing on all of our addictions. So at this point, I'm drinking. Every night I come home, I need to have at least one drink just to relax, right? And just to feel a little bit of connection and so forth. I'm now in my mind, I even might seek out so-called spiritual paths that are all to do with my intellectual development that will help me continue this process of suppression, which is all based on judgment of the underlying layer. All right? So, how do I get rid of this now? Because this is all constructed in me by my environment, and this has all probably happened way, way, way back in my life, although now, a lot of the times, I am my own worst enemy with perpetrating this towards myself now, because normally I've felt every one of these judgments, and I let these judgments also, because I couldn't have any other way of dealing with it, I let these judgments come a part of me as well. So now I judge myself for having a cry. I judge myself for feeling fear. I judge myself for being in anger. And I have all sorts of judgments about it. Like being angry, not spiritual. You're always going to hurt someone when you're angry. I'm afraid that I'm going to hurt someone if I express my anger. There's ways to express your anger without that. But this is all the fears that get built up inside of us. Now, to undo it, can you see there's one common thread through the whole thing? What's the thread? It's the judgment of the emotion. Can you see that? If you can release the judgment of the emotion, then all of the emotions will start flowing as your soul can handle them. Can you see that? If I can release this judgment of the emotion, the only problem is the whole world is judging the same emotions you're judging. So there's a lot of blockages to release about, what is everyone going to think of me doing that? Do you know what I mean? They're all judgments that are constructed because we're now living in this world that is so detuned from their emotional state, their true emotional state, and have so much judgment about all sorts of things that in the end we never get to our causal emotion again. So my suggestion firstly is to look at your judgments. They all came from your childhood. They all came from places that were very, very damaging towards you. A child feels a judgment as a terrifying experience, right? And you'll notice that when you start noticing the judgments of others come at you, and so instead of getting out of the mind, and instead you get back into allowing people's judgments to hit you. See, what we do, we don't do this very often. What we do instead is we say, yeah, Mum judged me, but that's what she's always like. So what did we just do? We just skipped over the fact that we got judged again by Mum. Now, Mum might be 70 and I might be 40. And Mum just judged me the same way she did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. In fact, the same way she did all my life pretty much. And I just say, well, that's Mum. And sure, that's Mum, but the judgment is not truth. You know, and I need to stop explaining away these things. And often we explain them all away by just saying little comments like, oh yeah, but you know, they can't change, or they're too old now, or that. And we give ourselves all these excuses to not feel the judgment. If we can't feel the judgment, we are never going to get to the emotion. So, for example, if my mother says to me, I'll give you an example of what happened last week while I was with her. How's that? We were sitting down for dinner, and my father says to me, I'm going to pray for our meal. Is that all right? I said, yeah, it's your house. You're allowed to do what you like, right? And Mum says, oh, but we're praying through Jesus' name, right? And I go, yeah, no worries, I understand that. Right. And then she made a condescending remark to me about that, about me believing that I'm Jesus, right? Now, what do I feel in that particular state? So what do I feel is some condescension coming at me. Now, I could say, oh, yeah, that's Mum, you know, she just doesn't believe I'm Jesus, or she's uncertain. The best way to put it, she's uncertain, of course. So she's uncertain, and she likes to make fun of it occasionally, and she thinks it's a bit of a, laugh, you know. So that's the, and she's also quite afraid, of course, about me saying that I am too, but that's a different issue. Now, I can say all of these feelings that she has and dismiss totally my own emotional reaction, which is, I've just attracted my mother being condescending towards me again. How does that feel? Does that make sense? And in that moment, what do I do with that condescension? Like, I need to feel it. I need to feel that condescension enter me and feel what it triggers inside of me. What does it feel like? You know, this is where my definition of myself about women has come from, this condescending projection. By the way, before I was saying I was Jesus, she was still treating me condescendingly at different times. Does that make sense? She just now has another good reason to do it. Right? And your parents will often have reason after reason after reason after reason to do what they continue to do with you too. Exactly the same. What I need to do is feel the judgment. When I feel the judgment, I can feel, wow, well, you know, that's pretty nasty really in the end. And when I go deeper into that, how do I feel, you know, grieving-wise about that? You know, so when I was just sitting there, I just felt that flush of like self-judgment about, you know, again, my mother saying that I'm not worthy to be who I'm saying I am, you know, and allow myself to feel this the triggered emotion, which is this feeling of unworthiness, and allow it to come up in me. You know, I don't even need to say anything to her really, but most of the times I finish up saying something, but I can just feel the emotion rise in me. When you allow yourself to feel the judgment, you'll realise how powerful the judgment is to condemn you, how powerful that judgment is in shutting you down emotionally. Right? And when you allow yourself to feel the judgment, you'll go back down these lists. So once you stop judging your anger, you will allow your anger to be present. Now, that doesn't mean you go around yelling and screaming at everyone. It means that every time you're angry, you say, hey, a sec, I'm angry, and you'll run out to the bag and bash, 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 you know, and give it a good thumping and, you know, and then connect to what's the fear underneath maybe, and then maybe the tears, right? But there's all this childhood anger that's just sitting there, right? Just sitting there waiting to be expressed, and nobody's ever let it express because you got judged. And by the way, let's say what judgment really is. Judgment is really punishment. Right? So instead of judging, you could just write down there, I'm punishing. So in other words, I'm about to cry, punish the crying. Not allowed to cry. You just stop a person from crying by punishing the crying, don't you? Many of you have been punished for your tears. As an adult, you get punished quite easily by saying, oh, you're not crying again, are you? That's a punishment, isn't it? That's basically saying to you that your tears are not acceptable, right? Or, you're crying again, aren't you stupid again? Why can't you get on with your life? Why, you know, all these different judgments all are punishments. Someone trying to punish you for actually feeling something they need to feel inside of themselves, usually. But this is what the parent does. It punishes the child for the emotion that it is denying, the parent's denying within itself. That creates the next layer of emotions, which then the parent generally punishes, right? So when a child's just sitting there afraid because they can't go for a swim in the pool, what does the parent eventually do? Right, they shame them and they, you know, you're a weakling or whatever, you know, or they try to reward systems and all sorts of things to get them to jump in the pool, all of which generally are controlling. And so what happens in the end, instead of dealing in truth, we have this feeling of judgment about that, and then we get into our anger. What does the parent do with anger? Like the child's kicking and screaming. What does the parent normally do with anger? Normally physical abuse, isn't it? Generally. Corporal punishment, we call it. It's punishment. And really, this is the way the world has come to control you, by having a punishment and reward based system. So in other words, I don't love you all the time. I only love you when you're doing everything that I judge to be right and nothing for which I feel you should be punished for. That's the only time I'm going to love you. Right? And all of us are brought up in this system, generally. It's very rare in a family to not be brought up in this system. So what happens is I'm brought up in this reward-based, punishment-based system, and so whenever I have an emotion or a feeling that everyone says is good, then I get rewarded with love, in quotation marks, because it's not real love. And then whenever I have an emotion that everyone views as bad, then what I do is I get punished for having that emotion. And what we need to do is stop this process within ourselves, firstly. So you need to stop punishing yourself for feeling depressed. You need to stop punishing yourself for feeling anger. You need to stop punishing yourself for feeling afraid. Do you see what I'm saying? If you can stop this part of this happening, this will naturally unravel itself. Because every one of these is the thing that's locking this up. Does that make sense? So that's locking that up. This is locking that up. It's the punishment and judgment that's locking everything up. And if I can reduce that. And so stop judging people for feeling their emotions. Someone's in a rage, stop saying to yourself or to anybody else, oh, isn't it bad? Isn't it a terrible rage? Well, you know, judge him for that rage. No, he's good at in a rage. It's just a pity that he doesn't deal with it with the bag or with something else instead of yelling at somebody. But it's actually better that he's there than he's there, because he's just got another less layer of judgment to deal with in that place. And it's better if I'm there than in there. I've got a less layer. So how many of us feel fear is okay in others or in ourselves? Not many, really, actually. You know, we get quite frustrated with fear in somebody. You try seeing a little 3-year-old child that's afraid to do something that you want it to do, and you see your own reaction to that. And many of us get really upset, frustrated, angry, because we want the child to do something different, but the child's just afraid, right? And so if we can stop this process of punishment and judgment and reward systems and so forth, and just get back to loving every emotion that we need to feel, all the emotions will just start popping up naturally. So that's what I feel needs to happen for yourself, is to look at all of the emotions associated with punishment and judgment and allow yourself to feel about them. And then once you feel about them, they release from you. And when they release from you, you are allowed to feel depressed. So I started in my emotional processing where I felt depressed for ages. It was about 1.5 years. I felt depressed. Didn't get much else, didn't get any anger, didn't get anything. But then when I stopped punishing myself and judging myself for it, I stepped down into the underlying emotion. And you'll be able to do that each time. Yeah. And it's this punishment and judgment that comes from the parents, from the environment, not just your parents, but also from your environment, right? Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks, AJ.
Yeah.
Yep.